Hey everybody, I guess this is my face reveal, if you could call it that. But yes, I am Timothy Kazuka Loban of Sleeping Giant Africa. And yeah, we've taken a little bit of a break over the last few years. And moving forward, I can't necessarily promise a regular schedule when it comes to uploads. It depends on what the feedback is like and how my schedule fits in with different things. But I'm just experimenting with a different idea for now, and something I've been wanting to speak about for some time because I think it's quite a pressing issue and one that's spoken about a lot, but not necessarily unpacked and really explored in depth and detail. And I think, yeah, for today, I'm just going to quickly go through 34 reasons why a United States of Africa should happen. Okay, so let's get into it. So first, let's begin with the opening reason, and that is it's a new Africa on African terms. So when we really think about it, when we look at the map of Africa today, that's not an expression of like African identity and history and culture and territorial understandings. It's not organic. It was imposed, artificially imposed by non-African colonizers, mainly from Europe. Okay, so those borders that we see right now are, yeah, they are not necessarily organic and not borders that were decided by Africans themselves. Whereas in this scenario, Africa actually has a chance to kind of have a look and reassess what those borders, even if it's within some larger national system, how they look like, and the kind of institutions and laws and rules surrounding how those different areas and different parts of the continent, or what we would hope be a country, are governed. So yeah, it's a new Africa on African terms where Africans get to decide for themselves, for ourselves, as to what we want the continent to look like moving forward. Second of all, this is more anecdotal than anything, but I would kind of argue that a lot of Africans today primarily identify as Africans. And when I say that, I mean it in the sense of maybe, I guess for a lot, perhaps they'll kind of identify and relate to their ethnic group, or tribe, or whatever you want to call it. Maybe that will come first in some cases, not all of the time necessarily, especially for different Africans that are living and growing up within the cities, and are upwardly mobile and have like a smartphone and regular internet access, and are out there immersed in the modern world. It might be different for them, but yeah, a lot will identify with ethnic group, ethnicity. But then I think after that, for many, I think it might be the continent. It could be kind of a 50-50 split. Because when I think of my time that I've spent here in Africa, right now I'm in Kigali, Rwanda, enjoying a nice coffee. If you guys don't come and check out Kigali for anything else, come for the coffee. This African coffee that they make, I guess they, get like locally grown beans that are like well roasted. Then you get, your milk with some ginger added, and maybe a bit of a chocolate, like dark chocolate. Just superb. But yes, back to this point. Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially once Africans travel overseas, whether you are from Kenya or Nigeria or Burundi or Chad, part of it is to do with maybe the kind of interactions and how you're sort of, how people are kind of approached and treated from non-Africans, where they might just go, oh, they're the Africans, whatever reasons it may be. I do feel like Africans abroad find themselves, identifying more with the continent than the nationality. And this is always something that's been on the card and spoken about by different people. Colonel Gaddafi is one big name that springs to mind, and the kind of whole legend and lore surrounding that. Then you also have the fact that I think in the lead up to the building, in the lead up to starting the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, I think that's what it stands for, which was the precursor for the African Union that we see today. In the lead up to that, I think that organization and what it's come to be in terms of more of a forum, for cooperation, maybe peace talks and agreements. It's more the gathering point for African leaders than a really kind of active and sort of binding institution. And I think it was kind of the compromise option for a United States of Africa. That's what I remember hearing about, and we could look into that more. So yes, there is that support for it in different circles around Africa. So there's that. Number 3, it would lead to more regional trade. So essentially, this would almost happen by default, because if you have the whole of Africa as one country, then they're all going to be using the same currency. So immediately, that just leads to trade becoming so much more frictionless in terms of, whether you're in Egypt or South Africa or Chad, Ghana, wherever you may be, you can do business and buy and sell things from other parts of the country. In this example, it's again living in Ghana and buying something from Egypt will be just as seamless and as simple as buying something within Ghana. So naturally, you're going to have these different markets within these countries, or what would be blocks of sorts, complement each other when it comes to trade and business. So by default, it would lead to more regional trade just by virtue of it being more frictionless. You don't have to incur as many exchange fees when it comes to making exchanges. That's going to lead to more regional trade. Then you'll also see that would also feed into the launch of a stronger and more robust currency. So essentially, if we stick to reason number 3, which talks about a more regional trade, if you have more regional trade, and again, this is going to be within one country, all using the same currency, then you're going to get less leakages, when it comes to international trade. And when we talk about that, it's a term we use in economics to talk about imports. So instead of, and that will happen in 2 ways, because essentially, in the past, if South Africa purchased, some milk from Kenya, then that would involve them having to sell some of their local currency in exchange for the Kenyan local currency, or they'll have to dig into their USD reserves, however it may work. But either way, that would count as an import for South Africa when they purchase that milk from Kenya. So that's going to put pressure on different currencies. But then when it's happening within one country, so if it's state Kenya selling milk to state South Africa, it does not count as a leakage. It's internal trade. You're using that one currency. So using that one currency, and whenever you're exporting to other countries, you're all using the same currency. So you're, all of those trade flows that would have been spread out over all of these little different currencies across Africa is now going into one. So yes, it would become a stronger currency, and in turn, that can be useful because it can better protect the continent against currency swings, because it's now a situation where, for example, if we talk about some of the smaller, poorer parts of Africa, where maybe they're landlocked, they are, suffering or having issues fighting climate change, and perhaps they rely on exporting their resources, their minerals, whether it's oil, tea, cocoa, natural gas, whatever it may be. For those smaller players, they can find they can find themselves in a situation where if prices fall, their currency just plummets. It just like goes to the toilet because the volume in their exports just falls so much. So the demand for their currency falls in turn, and that brings the value down, makes their imports much more expensive, increases the cost of their debt. But then in this scenario, those smaller countries, they wouldn't be relying on using their own local currency. They'd be using the much larger United States of Africa currency. So, you're getting to spread that risk and in turn better protect the continent and particularly smaller players within it against those currency swings that are happening, like what we're seeing with the US dollar now, where it's on the upswing, becoming stronger, appreciated in value. Then you get larger, more dynamic capital markets. So we've seen that there's been a little bit of talk about creating this kind of Pan-African stock exchange where, I guess it would be one mega stock exchange that would maybe host hundreds of different companies spread across Africa. And on that one platform, you can invest however much you want in these different companies to buy their shares. Now, I guess it's, that's not going to be the easiest thing to do. It sounds simple, but I think when it comes to figuring out like the paperwork and like the laws and, things surrounding litigation and, your fiduciary responsibilities and how that's enforced in different places, it's not going to be the simplest, but it's still a good goal to have. And again, in the scenario where it's one country, I'm sure that would help make that ambition easier to get that Pan-African stock exchange where, you just have like, a much larger African stock market that's open to much more people within the continent to freely invest in. Okay, so yes, you would get that, and something like that would be huge if it could ever be pulled off in terms of the potential and the kind of like funding that would unlock for different, African entrepreneurs. Then we have, a unifying vision. So yes, I think it's that type of thing where when we think about, how to bring different African leaders together to get on the same page and do better by the people. Maybe something as big and as daring, as building a United States of Africa might be that thing that brings all of the different leaders and major players across the continent together to get things done and to really have things moving. Because together, it's if these different countries did work together, amazing things could happen. And this might be the thing, this might be what it takes to actually evoke that sort of commitment and that political will for it. Then we also have this. So yes, every cloud has a silver lining, and in many ways, depending on how you approach things, something that can be your weakness in one way can be your strength in another way. And I think we see that very much with this in terms of, we go back to that point we made before about Africa's, forcefully imposed borders, from the Berlin Conference, different colonial powers. And, a lot of different African countries started gaining independence from the late 1940s, up until the 1980s, maybe early 1990s. So a lot of these countries are still relatively young. Again, these national borders are kind of just artificially imposed. So it's a situation where when we talk about um, the length and the kind of legacy you see there in terms of different civilizations and peoples, it's still relatively short in these different countries. So in a way, compared to perhaps Europe or different parts of Asia, where if you try to propose something similar, because of, they've been nations for so long and they've formed such distinct and kind of almost dogmatic national identities that it'd be difficult to pull that off. Whereas in Africa, first of all, those supposed national identities and citizenries are artificially imposed, and again, it's all still new. So why not say that, man, maybe this makes people and the leaders most open to actually making a go and making a move for this. So there's that. Then we also have the kind of market you get. So currently speaking with Africa, as a continent overall, you just have a lot of small fragmented markets, a lot of small fragmented disjointed pieces that just lead to bottlenecks in so many ways that are just unnecessary. All right, so let me have these off for now. Reflection getting in the eyes. So yeah, the point is, when we think about that, if you were to combine them all, then yes, of course, naturally you get a much larger market economically, a much larger population, and then also a very diverse country in terms of, yes, there's so many different opportunities in different places, and I think that the diversity of that market and the peoples and the different environments and cultures within it would lead to a more competitive landscape across the continent, where people are, they have more of a spring in their step because there's just so much at stake and there's so much to enjoy and behold it when you get that type of diverse market, which, maybe there'll be none more diverse than Africa in many ways. Then you also have just a kind of hard data and proof facts surrounding it. So if the United States of Africa were to, just become one country, okay, it would be the largest country by landmass in the world, and it would also be the largest country by population. Okay, so largest country by landmass, it would, Africa's bigger than Russia, because, it's a continent. And yes, it'd be the largest country, and then its population, I think Africa's population right now is about, it's closer to 1.5 billion than it is away from it. And if you check India and China's population currently, it's more in the early 1.4 billions. So Africa's population right now, I think over the last year or two, it overtook both of those Asian giants. So it would have the largest population. We're thinking about, in terms of how they can act how these different countries would act as a unit in that way. It would also be one of the youngest countries in the world. And, we have this picture of this beautiful young lady. And the reason why I use this picture is just to demonstrate that, she might be in her late teens, maybe 18 or 19 years old, possibly in her early 20s. And this young person, half of Africa's population are within her age range. They're either within they're within an age range or younger. So just to kind of help it really make sense and kind of give you context, maybe, have a look at your family wherever you are, especially if you're somewhere perhaps in Europe or the USA or different parts of Asia. And just have a look at all of your family in terms of your mum, dad, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, and half of them, half of all your family are under the age of 19. I don't know. That's not like the situation with my family back at home in the UK. I can tell you that, and it's very young. Okay, so there's all of that potential when it comes to fostering that labour market and consumer market. Then it also leaves the United States of Africa in a better position to get better value out of their most prized commodity, pun intended, which is its resources and minerals. It's spoken about time and time again in terms of the abundance that Africa has here, but again, it's one thing to have it in the ground, and it's another thing to get it out of the ground and to refine it and to build the infrastructure needed to do that, and then to get the pipelines and all of that ready to have it prepared to power the economy of the world. And right now, many African countries still fall short of that and are just relegated to, doing the low value added jobs at the primary level in terms of, getting the resources out of the ground, maybe doing some basic refinement, and then it's, off to like a foreign company who takes care of the rest, and then the money goes in their pocket. So yes, this is something that's always spoken about. But then, yes, if you had one country in terms of, one national government, it'd be in a better position to, first of all, reach a consensus on that and to enforce the whole idea of getting more bang for the buck when it comes to the resources. And one simple way to do that, which is what different African governments do to some degree or another in different countries, where they have, national champions, where part of the economic activity and investment surrounding those resources are being done by state, government-owned companies, nationalized companies. So part of the resources are nationalized in that sense. If you can take that and then extend it to a, expanded national level, where you're doing that as a national government for all of these resources that we see, here before us, then yes, that's going to put them in a, put the continent in a better position to make more money and to see more gains from it. And even, you could even have a situation where now you've got this national United States of Africa government, and they could, be like the African version of OPEC, where perhaps, based on, forecasts surrounding demand and use and growth targets or whatever it may be, they, these different, Africa, the United States of Africa, kind of manipulates, like fixes production. And what I mean by that is it's like what's done in Saudi Arabia and other OPEC partners, where if it's a situation where they feel that oil prices are becoming too low and it's not being worth their while in terms of the cost of extracting it and refining it and then selling it, and then their profits, then they will produce less. They will restrict production because they have so much of the supply, world supply in the first place, and that raises prices. No reason why the United States of Africa couldn't implement something similar. Then, speaking of that, if you have this, national champion, these nationalized companies, so maybe you've got different resources that are, yes, nationalized and run by different government agents and corporations, then yeah, it can also create a kind of conversation around, yeah, what happens with all of the profits of these different companies. You know, where do the gains of this go? And that's where you would do something ideally like set up some kind of sovereign wealth fund, you know, on behalf of all United States of African citizens. And yeah, you know, whatever that's like, yeah, similar to what Norway and Saudi Arabia and these other countries do, where that money is set aside for the people and maybe different projects for investment or whatever it may be, you know, some kind of rainy day fund. Maybe it's used to fund a basic income, I don't know. But you can put that together under a United States of Africa. And another thing that it does is it can also influence the different commodity markets and other capital markets in terms of the money within that sovereign wealth fund and how it's invested. Okay, so again, it's just helping to consolidate and build up the leverage of the continent as a whole. Okay, and yes, in this situation, if if we had a United States of Africa, so all of this is one country, and this, when I talk about this, this includes sub-Saharan Africa as well as North Africa. We'll get onto that later. But yes, in that situation, the United States of Africa would become a multi-oceanic, yes, my bad, a multi-oceanic power. Okay, so what I mean by that is, yes, Africa, United States of Africa would be surrounded by and have access to the Atlantic Ocean to the west, and then the Indian Ocean to the east, okay, as well as the Mediterranean Sea to the north. So it would be, yeah, put the continent and, well, put the country in an ideal position to exploit and make the most of those trade opportunities when it comes to different ports and shipping routes. It also gives Africa that added cloak of protection when it comes to national security. Yes, and again, yep, if you are one nation, I guess the threats of invasions from within could still be there, but yeah, this just kind of helps build up the fortress. Then you could say, yes, it helps to reunite families. So yes, under this United States of Africa, it would, yeah, it would be borderless. It'd be just like a country. So whether you're in Niger, Nigeria, or Mozambique, or Namibia, you can go wherever you want, work, get your job. It's all one country. So yep, maybe as a result of like past conflicts or, you know, civil wars or whatever it may have been, where you've gotten families who flee to different parts of the continent and are now, you know, somewhat separated from each other or can't really spend extended time together because of the way they are on different borders, and then there's the complications surrounding like visas and residency. This would solve all of that. Then when you think about it, yeah, the Lingua Francas, so the main languages are already there. So, yep, when we look at the different languages that would be spoken, yeah, I guess maybe you can boil it down to four, and these are like four ones used within the African Union, where there's, you know, Swahili, English, French, Arabic, okay? And if you even want to be even more kind of, I don't know, fancy or poetic about it, you can do English, Arabic, and Swahili. So you have one language representing, like, I guess, Christianity and Western influence, whatever, that history. Then you have another language representing Arabic influence and history and Islam, and then you've got Swahili that represents, Bantu languages, like more indigenous African spoken languages. But the languages are there to make that happen. So yeah, why not? Okay, then you also have the different benefits that we'd get when it comes to data sharing and cloud computing. So yes, you would have, again, a lot more seamless kind of interaction and engagement between different data points in different parts of the continent. And, it'll be a lot easier for people in smaller, poorer parts of Africa to maybe access and use online services such as related to e-commerce or education or streaming that can be hosted and more effectively by larger countries and larger players. Yeah, you have those benefits concerning data sharing and cloud computing. Then we also have this. So yeah, I find this one quite interesting. So when we think of one of the big issues that is holding the continent of Africa back so much and just restricts a lot of its potential, I think almost all of us can agree that it's leadership. If it's not the number one reason, I definitely put it in the top three. It's up there. When we think of like the corruption, the carelessness, the human rights abuses, the straight up graft and thievery that just happens, rent seeking on a daily basis. Yeah, it's really just holding back the continent. And perhaps when you have one country, you might have this kind of, reality that you've got free movement within this huge, diverse continent. So yes, it's that situation where if the local governor or leader, whatever we'd call it, in the state of Nigeria, okay, if they, or in the state of Tunisia, if they are governing in a way that is not really working to the good of the people, and you have corruption and all of these issues, then people can not only vote at the ballot, they can very easily vote with their feet and make the consequences of bad governance pretty immediate. And you see something like this in the United States quite often, where even now you are seeing this wave of migration coming from different blue states, blue, more liberal states such as California and New York, where they're migrating to Florida and Texas, okay, and a few other parts of the South. And part of this is to do with like the regulatory environment in the more liberal states, the taxes, and then just the approach to local issues and the state of it when it comes to things such as crime in these different major cities within some of the blue states. And yeah, they're voting with their feet and they're leaving, and then that in turn puts pressure on local land values and how much businesses can make, and that compromises their tax reserves. So yes, you've got this kind of additional check that can be applied to add pressure to these different governments in terms of that ability to just migrate how you like. Okay, so yep, there is that. Then you also just have the fact that as one country, there'll be a much larger pool of investment opportunities for African capital. So yes, if you are a maybe it's an African sovereign wealth fund or investment bank or a commercial bank or a wealthy individual or just a everyday person or middle class family, in terms of what you do with your spare income, or where you plant your money to get the best return, yes, you've now got this expanded market. So yes, in the past, if you were living in Gambia, then if needed, there were ways that you could invest and purchase stock in other African countries, but again, the different steps you would be required to go through just didn't make it convenient. Now it's a lot more convenient, simpler, and cheaper under this scenario. So yes, you're in Gambia, and where you can place your money is not just Gambia now, it's the whole of Africa. So it can be in Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, South Africa, Ghana. Okay, so yeah, you have that much larger pool that creates more competition and more opportunities for you to get the best return. And we also see an ideal linkage where we can get the relatively wealthier regions and parts of Africa, such as the northern African parts like Algeria, Egypt, Morocco, along with South Africa, where these are the countries that have a little bit of that spare capital and money lying around to invest around the continent to help launch different businesses and growth. Okay, so yes, a much larger pool of investment opportunities for African capital. You have that larger pool where capital in the richer parts of Africa, they can find parts of the continent where they can invest that money in cheaper land, cheaper labor, and make a quicker return compared to just operating within their limited market. This, brings that possibility to the fore. So yeah, we have that. Then you have much larger pool of work opportunities for labor. So again, yeah, it's something to consider in terms of when we think of where young Africans and older Africans can go for work and job opportunities. It's not just somewhere in Europe or in the United States or in Japan or China. There's also the continent itself. There's also, there's a number of different major cities that are really seeing a lot of growth and development when we think about a Nairobi or Johannesburg or a Cairo, which is where this is, Algeria, Maputo. Yeah, there are these huge growing cities where people in other parts of Africa can go to and kind of try their hand at setting up a local business or employing their trade and finding work. If you cannot find it in your local area, then why shouldn't you have the chance and opportunity to explore elsewhere for it? And this would make that available for lots of people across the continent because it's all within one country, so there's no borders. Then it also brings perhaps a needed conversation on identity in the 21st century and whether the model of the nation state is still applicable in its current form, and where do we go next from that? Do we move into this space where we get enlarged nation states, as we see with the example of the United States of Africa? When we think about the world that we're in today and the type of technology we're working with in a very globalized and global context, everything is just happening at a much faster rate. That, when we think of the different thinkers and politicians and among others who helped construct and implement these systems, at their time, perhaps 100 years ago, under like Woodrow Wilson, and when he kind of really mainstreamed the idea of the nation state, and moving on from there, perhaps there's a need for change, and maybe this conversation around the United States of Africa might get it going in other parts of the world. Then you have a much larger and stronger trading bloc. So yeah, it's similar to, like, say, the EU, where when you look at all of those individual countries, whether it's Germany, France, Italy, it's much easier for them to negotiate and go toe to toe with other regions and corporations around the world as a bloc versus just individual countries. And that gives them more leverage to get more concessions and more benefits for their bloc. And yep, you would have a similar thing when it comes to the United States of Africa. Then you also have, I think, yeah, a really huge benefit in that it would just set off a huge boom and a constant when we think of a large and thriving tourism sector. Because again, first of all, you'll get a boom in tourism locally, which would count as domestic tourism. But yeah, locally in terms of, yes, people have the chance to just explore and see so many different parts of Africa in terms of fellow Africans. They can go different places to meet with family, to see different natural sites. Yeah, you get that local boom. Then you would get an international boom in tourism because again, for tourists that are visiting the United States of Africa, it's now a situation where their visa grants them, once they have a visa, they essentially have unlimited borderless travel to what are currently 54 countries in Africa now. So that's just, that would be unprecedented and a huge opportunity for the continent. That would lead to, I would imagine, that would definitely lead to a major boom in tourism in terms of, think about if you're just watching this video now, and instead of it being a situation where, oh, you've been thinking about whether you wanted to visit Ghana or Tanzania or not, and it's something you've been going back and forth on, and it's that situation, you can get a visa for Tanzania, but then if you go to Kenya or another neighboring country, you still have to go through customs. So yes, even with the current space we have in Africa right now, where there's a lot of, you apply for online visas or it's visa on arrival, even in that situation, you still have to go through borders and do these checks. You wouldn't have to do that under a single country. So yes, somebody can decide, oh, I'm going to go and visit Senegal, but maybe I'll also take a trip to Ethiopia while I'm here, or go to Egypt. You would be in a space where they could do that, and that would just lead to a massive boom, which would bring much needed foreign currency and perhaps help create jobs and preserve different livelihoods. So yes, it would definitely lead to a boom in tourism, major boom. Another reason for having the United States of Africa is that it would create a stronger passport. So a United States of Africa passport is invariably going to be stronger than any individual African country's passport. And that's for two reasons. The first reason is by default, it's stronger because this African passport grants you the ability, the United States of Africa passport grants you the ability to live, work, live and work as a citizen in what was 54 countries. So by default, it's stronger in that sense. And then when it comes to, negotiating visa arrangements and kind of reciprocal agreements on tourism and immigration with countries outside of Africa, the United States of Africa would be in a stronger position with this much more powerful passport in terms of what the opportunity to travel, visit, and work in the United States of Africa presents people compared to this one individual country. Okay, so you get the stronger passport internally because you can now work and live and travel to all of these 54 countries seamlessly without border checks. And then, yes, it will make it a stronger passport internationally. The United States of Africa would be better able to negotiate and push for concessions and better visa terms from other countries outside of the continent. Right? Then you have, it could reduce, it could, reduce long-standing regional inequalities. So again, yes, you just have a situation where different regions, like even smaller countries and those that are landlocked, there's other ways. They're on a more kind of level pegging with other parts of the continent in terms of they have more to work with when it comes to competition. So maybe a landlocked country like Niger, that's the hot topic nowadays. Right now they struggle with electricity and fuel, but under a national system, maybe yes, um, they would be better able to manage that, and they could take advantage of opportunities and capital and money elsewhere. It's going to be much easier for them. And you might always have people migrating, or business people migrating to Niger to take advantage of cheap land and low wages. All of those opportunities are just there and a lot more easier for people to tap into when you have that national model of the United States of Africa. And it could reduce those inequalities. And you see that in a way of the United States. If you compare the differences in living standards and wealth and job opportunities in each of the different US states, and then you compare that to, say, the EU and those different member states, or maybe even Africa or other parts of the world, you see that the inequality is not as stark in the US, in part because if things are getting too bad in one place, you can always move somewhere else and kind of at least have that extra shot at kind of escaping that poverty cycle or that rut. Then a United States of Africa would also bring a more organic growth of towns and cities. So right now, under the current scenario, where you've got 54 countries with these artificial borders that were drawn on the basis of like, oh, this is where my territory is. Oh, it bumped into yours. Okay, let's draw a line. It didn't necessarily consider different natural borders and different natural resources when it comes to like lakes, rivers, groundwater, and wildlife and nature and forests, all of those things. Perhaps, under the current scenario, some of those borders have been drawn without consideration for those things, where it's cutting into and disturbing nature, or different communities who maybe prior to those borders were used to living freely amongst one another and sharing resources in a particular way that they now cannot do because of those borders. Here, those borders would not be there, and you would get a kind of more natural, organic growth of cities with less restrictions, less national restrictions, less territorial border restrictions. Then we have the larger, you'd get a much larger army. So yes, you'd have a United States of Africa army versus, again, just individual countries with individual armies. And then what's also good with that is the more competent, larger armies, when we think of different countries such as Egypt, South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Rwanda to some extent, they can, they're able to pool their resources in terms of weapons, training, all of those areas to just help create a more strong, robust, and uniform national military force, but for a whole continent. Then you get the added benefits in education and training. So yes, this is another situation where perhaps you have a person that's grown up in a much smaller, less developed country like Chad, and perhaps they want to learn how to become a software engineer, or they're really interested in robotics and artificial intelligence, and they really want to further their studies there. But then, because of location, because of where they are, they might not necessarily, under current circumstances, they might not be able to continue pursuing that because those resources aren't there for them to help build that passion into this fully fledged skill. But under this scenario where it's one country, that person in Chad who wants to study robotics, they can go to South Africa and study that, or other parts of the continent which would better match their needs. It's a lot more seamless and simpler for them to do. So you get those added benefits with education and people being able to build up their qualifications and train themselves. You also have the fact that depending on how language is spoken and applied in communication, again, if we have a situation where like the whole of the continent, when we talk about their newspapers, their research reports, their literature, their, so much content and data and information, if you have all of it in these, 3 or 4 different languages, then that's going to really lead to just a massive opening up of access to content and literature and education that can help different people in all parts of the continent. Okay, when we think of those, going back to those data and knowledge sharing opportunities, especially when it comes to settling on a set number of languages and beginning to publish everything in those, a lot of benefits, which would really help increase the educational attainment and skills and qualifications of Africans to help people compete in the 21st century. Then it gives Africa an opportunity to really become a big technological power, because they could do what countries such as China and India do now, for example, where if these different corporations, whatever industry or sector they're in, if they want to invest in the country and be in a position to make lots of money and quite quickly, then the other part of the deal is you have to engage in technology sharing agreements, hand over a certain amount of equity. But yes, the main one we're focused on here is the technology sharing agreements. Africa would be in a better position as the United States of Africa to push for those concessions and those changes because of that added leverage. There's also the argument to say that, like what we said before concerning identity, maybe what we see here is a natural progression from the nation state to like a super nation state, or whatever we may call it. I'm not too sure. Okay, then you also have the fact that as a continent, the United States of Africa would have the 4th largest proven natural gas reserves. So I think this would just put them maybe above the United States, above China. This is something quite considerable, and would raise Africa's importance when it comes to geopolitics and the commodities markets. It would also become the 6th largest proven, when it comes to natural gas, and a similar thing for oil. Then we have also, the potentials when it comes to farming here, just in terms of looking at the technological and capital opportunities unlocked with the United States of Africa, and how that, along with the education, like improved education and access to literature, how that can lead to more productive, more skilled, more effective farm workers and farms. And it could really create a situation where Africa could become the breadbasket of not only itself, the continent, but also the world. Because you have to remember, a lot of what we have of land that hasn't been cultivated and hasn't been kind of like graced by farming yet. I think 60% of that is in Africa. So there's so many opportunities there. Okay, then you have the fact that, yes, it would naturally lead to a foreign investment boom in terms of, yes, foreign investors will now be able to easily access a much larger, more dynamic market. So why wouldn't there be an increase? Okay, and with that added foreign investment, you're getting more foreign currency that you're earning from those investments, and then also, yeah, more technology, yeah, access to more technology, skill sharing, knowledge transfer, as these like companies come over and introduce their technology and work practices from different parts of the world to the continent. Okay, so yes, you'd get a forward investment boom. Okay, so yes, so those are all the different reasons why it should happen, why it would be a good idea. Here are some of the what would be the long-term consequences, and maybe some things to kind of be cognizant of. So let me put this here and make this smaller. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so the long-term consequences, first of all, you would see the consolidation and creation of new demographic blocks. So, yes, as as Africa becomes one country as the United States of Africa, you might get, like the creation of new blocks and demographics. So maybe in this scenario, depending on how the country is governed, let's say it's governed, for example, democratically by electoral votes, then that could create a situation where perhaps certain religions, maybe Muslims versus Muslims and Christians would have a more influential voice in politics, and maybe that would lead to some kind of face-off between the two. Among that, yeah, you have so many other blocks when you think of like larger, more dominant tribes throughout the continent. So there is that we get. Then there's the fact that, yes, with a United States of Africa, you would have arguably, in theory, you would have a stronger continent in more ways than one, and maybe that would just lead to added military aggression and conflict with surrounding regions. When you think about Europe, possibly the Middle East, India over the Indian Ocean, who knows? Okay, then maybe you would also get a kind of rise in police state. So again, if you're going to have this country, this is one country with 1.5 billion people of thousands of different ethnicities, languages, and cultures, across such a vast, scale in terms of land. And yeah, maybe it might be a situation where you will see, more state surveillance, more of a military and police presence across different cities and other parts of this country in relatively large numbers, as a way of, the government doing what they believe would help keep the peace and stability. You also have the fact that the police state might be it might rise in response to like separatist movements. So yes, if you had a United States of Africa, I'm sure there will be, and there are now, those who oppose it on nationalist or other grounds. And yeah, perhaps they would, have these separatist forces that would be fighting for that. Okay, so that's something else to consider. Okay, so yes, I'm blue in the face right now, but we're nearly finished. Um, then there's internal brain drain. So again, if you have this huge country that now has no borders, then what happens when everybody migrates from Lesotho to South Africa and vice versa? What happens to those other parts of the continent that once hosted all of those people? How do they survive and grow in that environment? Okay, then there's the increased, you would, maybe get increased racial and ethnic tension as you're getting, a lot more movement of different peoples, different cultures, countries, language groups, suddenly living and working amongst each other. So there is that. You'd also get a lot more immigration. So yes, for better or worse, just like how before we said that this would lead to a tourism boom, it would also lead to an immigration boom in terms of, now if you get a work permit or you are able to do business in the United States of Africa, that opens you up to this huge market. So I don't see why that would not draw more people to go and check that out. So you would have a lot more immigration, and this in and of itself would come with its own consequences. You might see more immigration coming from different parts of Asia, in the poorer regions, maybe even some richer regions where you have digital nomads like me and others who are just seeking opportunities and different lifestyles elsewhere. You're going to get more immigration. You'd also, surprisingly enough, get much more emigration, because like we mentioned before, that stronger passport that that you now have with the United States of Africa can be used by people to travel to other parts of the world in a way that would be easier for them compared to now, where they're just using their own passport and they just don't have the same type of leverage and bargaining power. And again, that will stand as another added pressure on governments. So yeah, there is my long rap over that. I just want to do my little bit to contribute to this space and this conversation. I think there is something to this concept of the United States of Africa, especially when we look at the time we're in now in 2023. And let's get the ball rolling on it and at least get a conversation started. Get content and ideas out there to help connect us with each other. But yeah, let me know what your thoughts are, what you think about the different reasons. I want to hear from you. Thank you, peace, and get woke, as we say here. Thank you.